Hi, my name is Jojo Ruba. I'm Executive Director of Faith Beyond Belief, a Christian worldview organization right here in Alberta. People often ask me, why did you come up with the name Faith Beyond Belief? That sounds like an interesting way at looking at faith. And I say, absolutely. See, the problem in our time, in our generation, is that too many people have a false or even weird definition of what faith is. Some people think faith is believing really, really hard in something that can't be true. Some people believe or say that faith is about a blind leap or wishing really hard that something is true despite all the evidence contrary to it. Even some Christians would argue that faith is all about the experience, and that once you have the experience, then you can believe. Well, that sort of reminds me of a play called M. Butterfly, about a British diplomat who goes off in mid-18th century or 19th century China and falls in love with this opera singer and has this wonderful experience with this opera singer, to the point that he's willing to leave his wife back home in England to be with this opera singer because the experience is so wonderful. His faith is so invested in the singer that he's willing to change his entire life. But as a diplomat, he should have known better, because at this time, this Chinese opera singer actually was an agent for the communist government, stealing secrets from this diplomat. Worse than that, at this time in China, there were no female opera singers. The person he had fallen in love with was a man. See, his experience took away from the fact that he should have looked at truth and facts first. And then, because those facts exist, he can build a faith based on the evidence. In fact, that's what Luke says in Luke chapter 1. He says, I have written this book in the book of Acts so that his friend Theophilus can believe the truth of the testimonies that he's collected. He said he's talked to eyewitnesses. He's visited these places. He knows that the truth he's presenting is worth believing in. And that's why his friend Theophilus should have faith. Ironically, even atheists have to have faith. They have faith that the universe began from nothing and had no plan or design. They have faith that morals exist, that we should behave a certain kind of way, and that when we behave a certain kind of way, this is the right way to behave. The problem is when you ask them where they get these ideas, they have a hard time explaining why they should have faith. For example, I met a young man who came up to me. We were doing a discussion about these kinds of issues. And he came up dressed up in a lab coat, trying to show off how smart he was. And this is what he said. You religious folks are always trying to impose your religion on people. But don't you know, the only truth that exists is scientific truth. He had faith in science. That one day science would explain everything. Science would explain how the universe began and why we're here on Earth and what our purpose is in life. But I asked him the simple question. I said, well, if science is the only truth, can you explain that to me and give me evidence using science that science is the only truth? He paused, began to think about it, and then he realized, no, I can't show you any experiment or scientific data that shows that science is the only truth. He was willing to admit it, right? Because that's the point. The idea that science is the only truth is, in fact, a philosophical, not a scientific statement. If you have faith as an atheist that morals should be followed, there's certain ways you should behave. You can ask this question: why should you behave that way? I was talking to a group of friends, actually they became friends, who were part of an atheist group in Ottawa. And one of the first things they asked me is, give me evidence for God. So I said, well, I believe in morals, that there's objective right and wrong, that there's certain actions and behavior and beliefs that are just plain wrong. And the only way to have objectively moral good and evil is if there's a God that exists. Ironically, 2 out of the 4 people who I was talking to agreed. They said morality can only exist if there's a God. But then they said this: that's why we don't believe morality exists at all. There is no such thing as right and wrong. So then I asked them, why, if you don't believe morality exists, do you insist on correcting Christians for what they believe? Why do you keep telling us that we're wrong? And one of them, she said, well, because we want the world to be a better place, and religion is very dangerous. And it was interesting because I didn't even have to say anything. Her friend, who was also the atheist, said, you know what, you can't say that. Why? Because morality is actually, these words you're using are actually moral words. When you say you want the world to be a better place, the word better is a moral word. When you say that religion is dangerous, you're implying that it's wrong to be dangerous. So you can't say that. And after that, they couldn't give us any reasons why they believed in morality. See, their faith was based on something not true. You know what's interesting when we look at what Scripture says about faith? It actually makes a lot of sense. In James chapter 1, verses 2 and 3, James says this, "Dear brothers and sisters, when troubles of any kind come your way, consider it an opportunity for great joy. For you know that when your faith is tested, your endurance has a chance to grow. So let it grow. For when your endurance is fully developed, you will be perfect and complete, needing nothing." What James is referring to here is that whatever circumstance we face, whatever danger, whatever heartache we face, we can understand that as believers, there's meaning and purpose to those circumstances. And the meaning and purpose is to grow our faith so we can trust God more. Because ultimately, that's what faith is. It isn't a blind leap. It isn't believing really hard in something that isn't true. It's trusting a God that's proven himself time and time again. So that whatever we face, we can keep trusting him. You know, ultimately, that's the point. Christianity actually gives us purpose and meaning. And the purpose and meaning is that we can live with a God who loves us. Because doesn't it make sense that a God who made the universe would want us to enjoy it? Doesn't it make sense that a God who sends us his one and only Son would want us to spend eternity with him? And doesn't it make sense that a God who cares for us enough to give us moral ideas, to give us reasons for how we should behave, also knows how we are designed and wants the best for us? See, that's the point. Atheism can say, oh, we can have faith in science and all these other things, but actually give no backing behind that. Christianity says we can actually have faith in a person, in a God who's proven himself and has showed himself reliable. And therefore, as he's made this universe, he's made it good, he's shared it with us, he can give us hope even when things look bleak. You know, I have to admit there are times when I face doubts. I'm sure you've done it as well. You've wondered, does God really care? Does he exist at all? Does it matter what I'm doing? And those are very hard times. But James here says it's very wise. These are opportunities. These are opportunities to remember that regardless of what we're feeling, regardless of what's happening to our lives, regardless of whether or not we're in despair, we can live with hope. We can have faith that the God who was there with us in our highs is still there with us in our lows. So ultimately, the challenge that we have as Christians is not just then to have this kind of faith where we trust God regardless of our circumstance, but to point to that faith when we talk to other people. Because ultimately, the world we live in needs hope, and they can only find hope when they trust God. That's why I love what we're doing as an organization. I love the fact that we're showing people that you don't have to have blind belief. Christianity that is about blind belief isn't worth believing in. But Christianity that's based on truth, on fact, is based on a living and real God who truly wants us to have faith in him. And that every opportunity we have, every circumstance we face, is an opportunity to remember that everything we do with God has purpose and meaning, and it's for our good, for our benefit. That's a faith worth having. If you want to know more about our ministry and what we're doing here in Alberta and in Canada, check out faithbeyondbelief.ca. Find a faith that's worth believing in, that's beyond belief.